Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With up to 20% of cows with a level of lameness on grass-based farms, Cusack from Cumra Vets and FRS manager Ned Dunphy join us to identify proactive measures farmers can take to reduce and treat incidence of lameness and promote good mobility on Irish dairy farms. I first asked Ger why lameness continues to be a challenge on farm.
I would think it's a significant problem on Irish farms. Like what has happened over the last number of years is performance around cell count and incidence of clinical mastitis has greatly improved. Fertility performance has greatly improved, but I think many farms are still struggling to get on top of the lameness challenge that they face. We've had a significant increase in the national herd, and a lot of farms are carrying 50% more cows than what they were carrying 6 or 8 years ago, and this has helped create quite a challenge on a lot of farms. On many farms, cows are walking long distances, and roadways may not be optimal, and there's quite a bit of pressure on cows, quite a bit of pressure on their feet, and it has created quite a high incidence of lameness on many farms. Teagasc did a study recently where they found that on the farms that they looked at, on any given day, 10% of the cows were lame, and on some of the poorer performing farms, the incidence was as high as 20%. So there is quite an amount of lame cows around, and I think it's an area that the dairy industry has a big challenge around.
And you make reference to areas that have hugely improved, in the area of udder health and also fertility. To you, Ned, have you seen, I suppose, similar levels of lameness and experience similar to Ger?
Yeah, definitely, Emma, out there at the moment. I suppose lameness is a huge cost, I believe, on farms at the moment. Apart from the welfare end of it, you have, I suppose, every time a cow goes lame, I suppose you have a lot of direct and indirect costs, really, which could be broken down into kind of the treatment costs, and the loss of production, indirect costs, which can actually be seen. But then the indirect costs which farmers sometimes can't see is, infertility. I mean, especially this time of the year when you're in the breeding season, a lame cow is not going to come into heat and maybe loses 3 weeks, or she mightn't even come bulling at all. So that cow will actually not go back in calf. That's number one. And number two, then, a cow that's very lame, and has a long-term lameness, maybe culled. So, I mean, the average cost they claim at the moment, and some figures they're coming from an English study are talking about around €350 per animal on average. I mean, some types of lameness like mortellaro and that would be at a lower level. But if you get a problem with sole ulcers and maybe white line damage, that's much higher cost. I suppose you could also add in the, animals, they lose condition, and they're also, what I believe, from a morale point of view, farmers, if they're watching their cows lame, it doesn't help the morale of people that are working on the farm either.
And you make a really good point, Ned. There are some quite obvious impacts of lameness, but there are hidden side effects and hidden costs that you have identified. If we think about the lame cow, to you, Ger, that animal is in pain, and where is the welfare concern and what is the welfare concern for that animal?
Well, I suppose we're in a time now where welfare is a higher priority for consumers and for purchasers of milk than what it would have been in the past. And lameness and mobility problems are the biggest single welfare challenge that the dairy industry has. You have challenges around around calvings and around the whole birthing process, but lameness is something that can cause a cow significant pain at any stage of the lactation, and quite a few cows are being culled for lameness, and we see on a lot of farms cows that get lame, and maybe they're not treated early on or quickly enough, or maybe the treatment they get isn't the best, and we see quite a few cows that get lame and stay lame for the better part of their lives. So I think it's really important that cows be lame cows be identified early on, and that they be treated promptly and effectively. And we want to avoid a situation where we have cows that get lame and have lameness follows them for the rest of their days. We certainly have to avoid those, because they're, from a welfare perspective and from any sort of perspective, they're not what we want to have on farms.
And Ger, is pain relief a common part of the treatment process for lame cows?
It's used in some cases. There's some good research evidence to suggest that using pain relief and damping down the inflammatory process in the foot improves long-term healing. So you have two benefits there. You have the relief of pain, and you have improvement in treatment outcomes. But I think it would be fair to say the majority of cows that are treated on Irish farms for lameness wouldn't receive pain relief. But there is research evidence to show that the use of pain relief is of benefit, and it improves treatment outcomes.
And it's quite a logical thing, because if you or I had a pain in our foot, we'd know all about it, and we would be, I suppose, pursuing some element of pain relief. So I think it is the same really for the animal. Ned, you referred to a financial figure of €350 per incidence of lameness based on a UK study. And you've alluded to a lot of the costs included in that. But like you say, I suppose that doesn't equate to a cow that is culled, and you could maybe put a figure of €1,500 to replace an animal. But, are there incidents where a lame cow is just too lame and she is not going to recover, and the best solution for that animal is to remove her from a system where she's, she has a daily commute of, 500 metres to a kilometre in and out of the parlour twice a day?
What I believe, Emma, is that it's important for farmers, especially if they have issues with lame cows on the farm, is first of all, have a paddock, or maybe a bit of land near the parlour where the cows, number one, don't have to travel too far. Because even from an animal welfare point of view, you don't want animals trying to walk long distances. Number two, I suppose, lame cows, if they're not treated in time, can become chronic. And when they become chronic, they're much harder to get a result. So, I think maybe one of the biggest issues at the moment, that farmers have, and even hoof trimmers have, is that there's not enough foot trimmers in the country to do the level of work that's needed. Because all we would hope would happen going forward, that we could kind of develop a hybrid system where farmers could actually initially, when they see a lame cow, they can lift it themselves and they can examine it and maybe say, look, I can treat this one, I'll put a shoe on her, and then get in his hoof trimmer every couple of weeks to actually, do the cows that are maybe not as lame or starting to go lame, and maybe build a very good program of helping to reduce the level of lameness on the farm.
And that regularity, Ned, say for a farmer who doesn't do any of the treatment of lameness themselves, how regularly should the hoof parer be in the yard?
Well, I do believe, look at it, a lot of that will depend on the number of cows. A lot of that depends on the level of lameness that is on the farm. But I do believe, a lame cow, when a cow is lame, she should be treated as soon as possible. But the problem at the moment is because of the lack, I suppose, of numbers of foot trimmers. You could be waiting a couple of weeks to get to a farm, and sometimes then the cow can become chronic at that stage. And I suppose the question you asked me initially, you can end up with cows being culled, because I mean, once a cow becomes chronic, she will always have that problem, and even if she becomes better after the treatment, she can revert back to lameness again later in the year.
And if we look at the broader picture to you, Ger, sustainability is something that we are becoming more and more aware of in the whole system of our dairy farms. Like, what would the sustainability concerns be around lameness in dairy cows?
Well, we're moving into a time now, Emma-Louise, where I think the name of the game is to try get as much as we possibly can out of each individual cow. For a number of years there, it was all about growing numbers and having a big number of cows. I think the game from now on will be to have maybe fewer cows and achieve a higher level of productivity per cow. And I think where lameness and good lameness control comes in there is that if we have good hoof care, and if we have prompt treatment of cows that go lame, and the farmers have a standing arrangement with a hoof trimmer, and a cow that goes lame gets treated promptly and effectively, we'll have fewer cows being culled as a result of foot problems. And if we achieve that, we have a better chance of getting 6, 7 or more lactations per cow. If we have a high incidence of lameness and a lot of cows being culled for lameness, you can have quite a few cows being lost after 2 or 3 or 4 lactations. And if we cost a replacement heifer at, we'll say, €1,500 per head, if you get 3 lactations, that's €500 per lactation of an initial cost. But if you get 5 lactations, well, you're down to 300. If you get 7 lactations, you're down to around 200. So I think there's a significant gain there if we can keep cows in the national herd for as long as possible and get as high a number of lactations out of them as possible. And maybe we should be thinking in terms of lifetime production and trying to achieve high levels of lifetime production rather than focusing on annual yield.
I guess some of the things that might spring to mind now, you may have referred to before, but when we see a cow that's visibly lame, we are in reactive mode and we are treating a problem. For both of you, could you give us maybe your top 2 or 3 proactive actions that a farmer themselves can take in order to minimise the level of lameness on their farm? And we might start with you, Ned.
What we see on farms at the moment, there has been a huge increase in the level of what we call mortellaro disease in the feed. And like a very good way of controlling this or getting on top of it is the farmer does a good foot bathing program. Now, a good foot bathing program will actually help to reduce the level and the spread of disease. And like, if on some farms we find that you can start with 10% problem with mortellaro, you could end up with a 50 or 60% problem. So a good foot bathing program, number 1, is very important. Number 2, and I suppose this time of the year, and you could relate to it, especially with silage and that, farmers, getting their silage cut, keeping their roadways well. I think the biggest problem I have sometimes with roadways is that farmers are allowing machinery to travel on the roadways. Big machinery, they tend to tear up the roadways. Cow roadways really should be for the use by cows. And if the roadways are good, you will find you will have less lameness on the farm. You'll have less problems with white line damage. You'll have less problems with drops and that in the feed. So those are 1 or 2 things that farmers could do. Another thing I think is very, very important from a farmer's point of view is actually the handling of animals. I mean, because of the huge growth in the last number of years of the national herd, there's bigger numbers of cows being bought in and out for milking. And I think what's very important from a farmer's point of view is if they could, allow the cows to walk at their own pace, because an animal is smart enough. They're not going to walk on stones, or they're not going to walk, on grit, if they're allowed to walk at their own pace. But if they're being pushed along, they tend to step where they're not supposed to stand. So a very simple thing a farmer could use if he is in a good situation is use something like what we call a bat latch. And a bat latch actually, you can set it to open maybe a couple of hours before you want the gap in the paddock to open a couple of hours before you want to go milking, and the cows will start to walk in at their own pace. So those are a couple of points, I suppose, that farmers could do, going forward, that will help definitely to reduce the level of lameness in the herd.
And to you, Ger, some of your top tips for proactive actions from farmers.
I think what is very useful to try get ahead of this on a farm and not just be in the situation where you're always reacting to. I think it's very useful if, for larger herds in particular, if there was a standing arrangement with the local hoof trimmer or veterinary surgeon, whoever does their hoof care, and that he comes in every fortnight or every 3 weeks, and that a concerted effort be made to identify the cows that need care for those fortnightly visits. And that might involve a little bit of mobility scoring. And this doesn't have to be complicated. I think it's just a question of standing with a clipboard outside the parlour door and watching cows as they come out and walk on that first 30 or 40 metres on the concrete. And just getting your eye in to pick up the mildly lame ones and getting those treated early on in the course of the disease. With a lot of lameness conditions, it just doesn't appear on a given day. It's something that's building for a number of weeks. So if we can get those cows treated promptly early on in the course of the disease, we'll have far better outcomes. I also think that there's a need there, or there's a requirement for people that are in dairy in a significant way, and we have lots of farmers that are in that position, that they have some capability of lifting a cow's foot themselves, that they have a facility that will allow them to do it, that they can lift a cow's foot, and they can identify the common conditions that we see. Ned mentioned Mortellaro. It's a condition that we see on an increasing level year on year. Something like foul in the foot can be readily diagnosed by a farmer and can be easily treated. With a bit of training, farmers can deal with some of the white line disease or some of the sole bruisings. And the advantage of a farmer looking after his own animals is the animals can get treated straight away. One of the difficulties with having somebody coming from outside is there's often quite a time lag before the animal gets treated, and all the research shows that treating lame animals early and promptly gives far better outcomes. So they'd be the couple of the main things that I would have. I would suggest, Emma, a standing arrangement with the caregiver around hoof care, and prompt treatment of cases as they arise. And if farms adopted that, over time they would get down the level of lameness in the herd. They're not going to achieve zero lameness, but you could get to the point where it would be down to an acceptable level. Like it is, the incidence on a lot of farms now is higher than what anybody would like.
There's some really, really interesting points there, and the standing arrangement with the hoof trimmer, I think, is an interesting concept, and particularly given what you talk about, Ned, when they are in short supply and there's more hoofs to be trimmed than there are hoof trimmers. If you have a standing arrangement, you have a relationship built up with this person, and they're more likely to come and attend your farm. It's regular work, and it's I suppose regularly being paid. But that aspect that you've both mentioned about the farmer having the ability to lift the hoof themselves and identify problems and get in and treat early. Ned, how can farmers educate themselves if this is something that they have never done previously?
Well, I suppose just in saying that, Emma, we're involved in some training there at the moment, and like even the last couple of days we had 6 farmers on a course, just really learning the basic skills, and kind of, I suppose, as well as learning the basic skills, understanding the theory behind lameness. And maybe, in fairness, you can learn how to trim feed, but you also need to learn how to prevent lameness on your farm. And a few points we made before this, which were very important, of like the footbathing, of improving your roadways, of improving maybe the size of where the cows are standing. Small little things, I suppose, that can help the overall level of lameness in the herd. So like there is a course available there for farmers that want to learn. We're also hoping, and maybe through Teagasc really, I think, and through the colleges, I think that every young farmer that goes through the college should learn the basic skills of foot trimming. So at least when he comes back home, he can lift the lame cow when he sees him, and he can also treat him. And then, like Ger was saying, have a standing arrangement every couple of weeks or every month with your foot trimmer. So you will never have a big level of lameness in your herd. And like, I suppose from our point of view, like, I mean, it is such an animal welfare issue. And like, I suppose in a sense, it's nearly becoming too acceptable as far as we're concerned, the level of lameness, So like, we need to get this down, because it's a huge cost and it's a huge animal welfare issue.
And finally, to you, Ger, a little bit of a side point, but farmers will be letting the bull out over the next couple of weeks. And, they're there for a short period of time and they're there with a job to do, but they are notorious offenders for getting lame. Why are bulls getting lame when they're out maybe with the cows for that 4 to 6 week period? And how can farmers prevent it?
If we look at the hoof of a bull, the thickness of the sole is less than a centimetre thick. And why bulls go lame is just that they give their feet such hardship. Now, suckler bulls are able to work away fine because they're out in the fields, but your dairy bulls and your vasectomized bulls, particularly because they're quite young and their hoofs are quite soft. The actual hoof material is quite soft. And why they run into problems is just multiple repeat traumas. They're jumping on cows on roadways on a hard surface. They're jumping on cows in collecting yards on a hard surface. They're probably, if they're young and vigorous, they're maybe chasing cows around the place. And all of these types of jumps and chases and all this type of stuff, it's all foot trauma. And over time, what happens is the foot just gets extremely bruised, or what can also happen is you can get a lot of excess wear. The actual sole gets quite thin, and where you have a quite thin sole, you'll have a thin area called the white line, which is very vulnerable, and you get stones and grit penetrating then and causing lameness. But it's just down to pure repeated multiple traumas in the majority of cases, Emma, for bulls. In an ideal situation, like what should happen, like, is those bulls shouldn't be mounting cows on roadways or collecting yards. And in an ideal situation, as far as possible, what should happen is they should be kept in the paddock. But like, look, obviously that's not practical. But I think the best alternative would be to have plenty of bulls, to give them good rest, to give them rest for a couple of days at a time, and try avoid the situation where your bulls are mounting your cows under rough concrete conditions or rough roadway conditions, because they're the type of situations where they're likely to injure both their feet and possibly injure higher up in the limbs as well. But like, you're right, it's a common problem. As a vet, we see a lot of bulls in trouble for the months of May, June and July. It's quite a high risk business being a bull this time of year.
And it's an interesting one because they're very costly to keep, and when you have them at work for a very short period of time, it is an awful shame when they do go lame. To Ger and Ned, I'd like to thank you for your contribution to today's podcast, and I think we've gotten a really good insight into what we can do on farm to proactively work on lameness. And as ye say, it is not something that can be totally eliminated from a herd. There's no such thing as 0% lameness, but we can get a long way towards getting it down to lower levels on farm. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Ned Dunphy and Ger Cusack for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.